Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming tonight. We're going to go through a couple things with the carvings that we've been finding in Mexico, Tula Hidalgo and Abuelo Stilisco. And you might have been here last night, and tonight we're going to go through and show the connections of the Anunnaki with not just the stuff that we found in Mexico, but some other areas around the world too that date back and go back far beyond what we know. And this is a large chessboard, the bottom of it. And you can see here, these type of winged beings look somewhat reminiscent to the Anunnaki and how they're depicted on the reliefs in Iraq and Iran and Turkey. What's interesting here is you see these, it almost looks like they have a trunk or a elephant thing, and it's also really akin to what like the Pharaoh's death mask or King Tut has on his chin. They have these weird beards that come off, and this is a 15-year-old boy's death mask that has a large beard coming off of it. So I looked into why was this on there, and what's interesting is, before Egypt there was a place called Kemet, and so this was to they put this on the pharaohs to embellish their creators from Kemet. And so what's interesting is we find these on these pieces, similar looking things, but these aren't beards. These are actually braided tentacles. They almost look like squid faces. Davy Jones off Pirates of the Caribbean would be the best, or a Cthulhu type being would be the best I could describe it. And so we found different garments, it looks like, I don't know if they're cloth or leather or whatnot, that cover them sometimes. They braid them, and it looks like they're evolved out inevitably. So it's interesting to see that connection with the pharaohs. It says that the Sumerians were known for their advanced military tactics, mathematical systems, writing skills. I mean, they brought a lot of stuff to the plate here. The first written language, supposedly. And this was 4100 BCE to 1750 BCE. And the term Sumer translates to the land of the civilized kings. And you guys might be familiar with the kings lists. And those kings lists that they have go back 250,000 years. And these kings reigned for a very long duration each. And the Anunnaki were believed to control the fates of the Sumerians. And so they were kind of the overseers of this culture, which is interesting to see because we see those beings as a dominant culture over this. And we also see it in the Sumerian depictions as well. You'll see a lineup of these bearded giants. Some of them have wings that are on the outside, and then as it goes in, they don't have the beards, or excuse me, the wings. And I think that's the evolutionary or the Anunnaki and then their kings that they oversaw. And that's, you can see here all the different things that we're going to cover in terms of the areas: Bolivia, China, Japan, Ecuador, Greece, Magdala. The Dogon tribe in Africa is one I'm going to really focus on. First of all, this is a video here that's going to show you guys, when we were digging in Tula, this was the first ground floor that they found during the Gen 6 documentary that came out in 2021. And they got to this point and couldn't go any lower, so it took funding and more time to get down. Once they broke through, they found, it's going to pan over here, you can see there's a second ground floor, and then it even goes down to a third ground floor at the 16-foot level, and that's going to pan over here right now.
And where is this again?
This is Tula Hidalgo, Mexico. Yeah, it's about 1,500 meters from the sacred site there with the Atlantean statues. It's on a farmer's private property right on the other side of the fence that goes around that site. And yeah, you can see there's the other additional floor and how it drops in. And those are things that if someone was just to go dig a hole and bury this stuff to make a hoax, unlikely they're going to put ground floors in to do that, Do you have a question?
There's photograph. It showed an
obelisk. Yeah.
In Mexico. I never saw that before.
Yeah, we found numerous obelisks, some of them 4 to 6 feet high. I've got one that's about this tall, made out of limestone. Let me go to the next here. You can see this block positioned in here as well, a different view of it, but that's also something that we're finding is, evidence of large quarried stones just thrown into the landscape above this type of stuff, which is also...
Take this out of Mexico? It seems like they wouldn't let you do that.
Yeah, I called immediately to the INAH thinking that this was grave robbing and going to be a serious problem. I wanted to let them know that this was going on at first. I didn't believe it. Then I started to believe it, and I called them. They actually gave me a letter from 2014 that they wrote from Abuelos de Jalisco stating that anything with an alien or a UFO has to be modernly made because those concepts weren't made until the 1950s. So anything like that is free to take out of there because they don't believe it's real. And so that's what kind of really inspired me to try to do something about this, because if it is real, even at a 1% chance, I really want to make that known because it needs to be documented, you know? Letting something like that slip through the cracks, I couldn't live with myself. And you can see this is the sacred site here, Tula, if you're familiar with these statues. And these are what it looked like when they found these statues. They weren't always on top of here. And so you can see the type of ground is very, very similar to what we're seeing in that 16-foot hole there. This is all the stuff they've pulled out of there to get down to the 16-foot level, which is really important, I think, to document, to see, yeah, they're actually taking this stuff out of there. This is an overview of the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. And I put this on here because I found it to be really interesting, the layout and the way these temples are made. They have a feeling that they're kind of similar. I mean, in that rectangular fashion with the amount of pillars or whatever those square posts were at one point. It's nothing in size comparison, but still in a shape. The Dogon tribe is something that's really a fascinating thing to me because these guys have a lot of real interesting beliefs and predictions from the past that we didn't believe until we actually had I think it was Hubble telescope that came out that was able to confirm. They said that this tribe came from the second star of Sirius, which is known as Sirius B. And they depicted an elliptical orbit of this star around this other star. No one believed that. No one saw Sirius B until we had Hubble. And so that's really an interesting thing because these guys, Syrian, Osiris, Assyrian Empire, this Syrian word seems to fit into many things. And in the Dogon religion, there's a thing called a Nomo. And these Nomo beings are said to have came out. They're fish-like beings with humanoid upper torsos and fish-like lower bodies. The term Nomo can denote a specific individual or a group as a whole. And while Nomos refers to the collective. According to the Dogon mythology, Nomo was the first living creature created by the sky god Amma. And that's something that's really interesting because in the Anunnaki beliefs, they had a sky god that was the primordial dragon that they recognized as their creator. And so to hear a sky god in this fashion as well, with a name kind of similar, I take that into consideration. And one twin rebelled, prompting Amma to restore order by sacrificing another twin whose dismembered body parts were scattered across the universe. Does this not sound like Osiris if you know the story? Very much so. And so that's interesting. The Dogon people were actually exiled out of Egypt. And the reason why is not 100% clear. And so that leads me to wonder if they maybe believed or knew something that was trying to be suppressed and they were canceled. Just like we would have today with cancel culture, they would push them out of there, right? So interesting thing. These Nomo also, that was a depiction, and they have very similar facial structures to the aliens that we see today. Same with these statues in Japan. Over 18,000 of these statues, they're called Dogu statues, have been found. And many of them have very similar faces to the Nazca mummies, to these alien type beings that we're finding here. Come down to this is in the Bible, Dagon. There's multiple verses in the Bible that mention this being. And he's a fish-bodied being. He was worshipped in Syria in cities like Mari, which is likely where Mary came from, and Magdala got their name. Now, this is really fascinating to me because Magdala and Mary, there's a lot to do with Mary. The word Mary is actually, it comes from, it doesn't necessarily mean someone's name, but it's a priestess or queen of heaven or God. And so there was lots of Marys that worked as these priestesses. And it's interesting because in the Anunnaki, there was a being named Inanna who did a lot of divine mother type acts, the Akkadian, I think it was referred to as Ishtar, Venus. In the Bible, Jesus exorcised 7 demons from Mary. This is a really interesting thing. The mitre hat that the Pope wears is actually in reference to Dagon, and it has a fish-type head. If you look at it, it kind of comes up as a, and so that's something that the papal has taken from this pagan deity and still kept it. We also have the Jesus fish, and so this fish concept goes back a long ways, even before Christianity. This is, an example here of the fish in Egypt. The fish shoots here found in Sumeria. You can see the papal hat here is somewhat similar to this type of fish. It says the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson to our enemy into our hand. So Dagon delivered their enemy into their hand, which is interesting. He seemed like somewhat of a positive character in the Bible in this respect. Leviticus reflects a directive given to the Israelites concerning their worship practices. The verse is a prohibition against offering sacrifices of idols to devils or goat demons, which refers to pagan deities or idols that the Israelites might have been previously worshiping. So these objects that we're finding could definitely fit into this category of this type of worship, and I think that's interesting. So now we come to Magdala. Magdala is an island area there on the Sea of Galilee, and Sea of Galilee is pretty iconic in the Bible with Jesus and whatnot. And to commence, it is pertinent to understand that the name Mary was historically employed as a designation for a priestess or a woman that considered themselves to be sacred brides of God. And specifically in the context of the Davidic kings, this interpretation is particularly relevant when examining figures such as the Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene. And so that could very well relate to these Inanna, Ishtar as well. They could have been Marys of their own time or in a different time. The prefix mer in mermaid signifies beloved, love, or sea, prompting an exploration of the term maid. While maid commonly denotes a servant or someone in service, it also implies a state of virginity. However, this notion of virginity should not be construed as solely in the terms of a sexual experience. Instead, it refers to an energetic state characterized by purity, innocence, and a sense of wholeness. These qualities are ideally experienced during the act of making love. So, the Virgin Mary doesn't necessarily mean that she's never had a sexual act, and I think that's important when you're looking at this. Over here we have a couple pictures of items that were found on Magdala. We see the flower of life, the sacred geometry, which is very, very important. This here is a piece we found in Tula with the seed of life on it. And what sits on top of this is a ring within a ring with a being inside of what looks like a boat or a ship. So in Ezekiel, the book, you'll notice a ring within a rings that he saw that flying through the air. And so it's interesting to see this almost landing pad with the flower of life on it. And the reason I put that on there is because just the comparisons of symbology here. We also have fish shoots that have been found in Tula, very akin to the Anunnaki, very, very similar. We also find aquatic representations, which, I don't know if that's a seahorse or a sea serpent, what exactly it is, but it definitely has that relation. So there's a lot of mermaid type things, like you can see on this skull here, maybe, hold it up here. You can see these beings, a winged being with a fish-like tail, almost like a mermaid would be described as. And so these mermaids, where they came from and how it came into existence goes back all the way to this point in Magdala. Up here you've got a few things with Anunnaki representations. You can see the language. This is found in Tula, and it's definitely not the cuneiform that we've tried to understand or that we somewhat understand, but it has a lot of the similar relations and symbols. See, this is a really iconic piece here. It's about this large, and it has a boat with, what's interesting, it's worn off here, but this is looks to be like the eagle-headed deity, but it has a fishtail. And obviously Horus in the front with Anubis, and I'm guessing this is Seth in the back, or Set, whichever you prefer. So it's interesting to see them riding this boat around, because in the Egyptian tales and with Osiris and stuff, there's a boat where they go around and bring, you know, intelligence and knowledge to people. This is one of the handbags that we found, and you can see one on my shirt too. This is actually on a handbag that looks similar to this, and then I took a long exposure of the picture of it. So some of these items, they glow with this green, you know, luminescence. This is a black light here, 365 nanometer, but you can see, you know, I made my shirt do that too, just for the, you know, but everything has, you know, a signature of this for the most part. So it's very interesting why they would embellish these items with this much effort, because to put green on the item like that, to get it into all the cracks and crevices and look clean as it does, it's a lot of work. This isn't just painted on this piece here, for instance. The stuff that's in there, it's actually like it's almost glue. It's not a glue, but it dries like a stone or like a glue would. Question? It's a great question. So we had over 200 pieces before we ever discovered this. And my wife, she makes marbles out of glass. And so she has the Illuminati uranium glass from back in the day that glows under a black light. So she mixed some of this in one of her marbles, and we hid it on our table. And I had that pine cone right there. And it was face down, but on there's a piece you can see here. This little bit glowed on the front, and I saw that. I was like, whoa, oh, shine that again, you know? And so then we started checking all of them, and the consistency was absolute in terms. I mean, it's not just that. You can see the red, maybe, you know, and so we find blue, red, green, yellow, white, all kinds of different phosphorescence, luminescence. It's very consistent across the board with this stuff. So, you know, this piece here is made out of brass, so we find some pretty advanced metallurgy. I brought a couple pieces. You guys are more than welcome to come up and handle this stuff and see what it is. I brought quite a selection here, but the metal work on some of this stuff is just over the top. And yeah, this is important too, actually. This guy up here, you know, this is pretty commonly seen, the Lamassu in Sumeria, but this isn't necessarily depicted on anything that I could find in Sumerian, you know, museums or anything like that, but it's described as the guardian of Ishtar. And so these scorpions with bearded headed on there were there. So to see one in the actual physicality like that was interesting to me. This cross here, actually, that I was just holding up, this actually goes inside of this box. I didn't bring the box because it weighs about 50 pounds. But this is what goes inside of it. And the box was made just for that. And that we find very commonly, all kinds of boxes to hold these little ritual devices, ankhs, pine cones, rings, all kinds of things, skulls. We see the pine cone represented in many different forms. You can see eggs and different crystals. We find a lot of quartz and calcite carved. Another representation of the Lamassu. I'm not even sure, you know, this almost looks like Anki with the hat. Well, the purse is consistent on so many of these beings. It's crazy, but he has this turban type hat, and if you watch that, those guys, the Anunnakis wore these hats, and this is an interesting one here. You know, it's got the tree of life, and that's something that we find. You'll find it on this cup if you look at it when you come up, but it's got, you know, these beings, and they're picking these pine cones off of this tree, and we believe that to be the tree of life or the representation of that. And so it's interesting to see the Anunnaki beings, and you know, I always thought there was just one of these bird-headed beings, but actually there's quite a few, and they were referred to as a type of a griffin demon, which is interesting because of what I just said in the Bible with these the goat head and the demon type representation or the idols that they were making. It could definitely be in terms of this. Also, we see up here something similar to the Shamash symbol. Go ahead. Your guess is as good as mine. I have not been able to figure that out. Still a mystery.
Situla and Sitchin at least thought that it contained the DNA for humans and stuff.
It's a great guess, I would say. Something like that, the alchemical supplies, magic supply. I mean, whatever they were doing to create, I think it
always shows up with the pine cone, too.
100%. Yeah.
There's 2 in that one, right? 2 I can see.
Yep. Yep.
And the pine cone represents the pituitary, doesn't it?
The pineal.
Pineal.
Yeah, supposedly. And that's a theory. I would say it's not a proven fact at this point. But it could absolutely have a directive or the control to it. Considering they're picking it off the tree of life, it could, our pineal gland is a really interesting thing because there's 2 times in our documented history that it produces a substance called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And this substance will cause hallucinogenic effects. That's what's in ayahuasca. What's also neat is our body will produce this naturally twice. Once is while we're in the womb at about 22 weeks or 21 weeks, I think it is, and once when we die. And to me, that seems like it's our soul entering and exiting the body. And when you have these experiences on ayahuasca, you feel like you leave your body. You can see it left behind and discarded behind you. It's absolutely yeah, I can't, that's for another topic, right? This is one of the purses here found. It's got, this looks like almost like a Dagon type deity here, very much so. Yeah. And different portal type things or devices. I mean, to us it looks like a portal. I'm not sure if that's what it is, but also like the geological specimens of some of these crystals. Like this has layers and different inclusions in it that have phosphorescence and luminescent traits to it in the quartz, which is fairly uncommon in geology. So seeing that is impressive to me as a rock collector. These things here, this one over here is showing the ones from Iraq found, and these are carved on clay. And I just wanted to show the comparison to what we found in Mexico because they're not the same. The language isn't the same. The constellations are the same. And the way it shows, this is the North Star. I'm not 100% sure what the C is in tune for, but there is a C here also, which is pretty critical. And you can find the different constellations and Big Dipper, etc., and chart out where the night sky was when this was drawn, essentially, or when they were depicting this to be. And so the sky is only in that formation. Don't quote me on the time, but it's more than 10,000 years that it takes to reset that cycle. So Göbekli Tepe's been a hot topic of this cruise, and I'm really glad because it goes back to a very similar age that what we're finding in Mexico. And you can see this is from Tula, this is from Abuelos, this is from Göbekli Tepe, and the similarities here are definitely very similar to me. The fact that they both have phallus on this case, and this one's a little more different, but they definitely have a similar vibe with this rib cage type thing that's being depicted here as well. What we know an alien to be, I guess, yeah. These are just some pictures here of them digging in the caves, some discovery pictures of, finding different pieces. You can see some of the luminescence found. This is a necklace about this big here. And what's interesting is these beads that were found with it have a red phosphorescence, and every one of them is a different half-life. So when you hit it with the black light, it looks like Christmas lights blinking on and off. It's very unique. And then the piece itself glows at a brightness that far exceeds any of these others. Is
that from Egypt? You got the eye?
No. We're finding the eye in Mexico all over the place. Yeah. In fact, I'm sure, yeah, it's right here on the front of this cross. Yeah. So it's a lot of cross-contamination of Egypt, Sumeria, even certain Greek elements, and what we know is like the earlier tribes, Canaan and stuff like that. We find Proto-Sinaitic language more so than the Egyptian hieroglyphs, or it's more comparable to that, at least from Tula. This type of stuff here, these are all made out of limestone, but little scenes of, this is a UFO landing on this pillar with, you know, different types of beings and pyramids. Up here you can see one of the pieces of metal. This bracelet is primarily silver, tin, and zinc. So it's interesting to see the metal composites of what they're making these things out of. This is a video here of that's about a 3-foot tall statue that was found. And this just kind of shows the layout of the cave and how much effort they've put into digging this out of here. And it's fairly extensive. And this was the first cave they found, and they found 3 now, back to back to back over the course of the last year and a half. And you know, if they buried one of these and some items in the ground, the chances of them doing 2 other full caves and all these other items at the same time so they could consecutively that to me sounds really far-fetched. It's, you know.
That's 3 caves on the same property there in Tula?
Yes. Yeah, it's, and like I say, it's right by the Tula Bee monument. So, and Cambridge did a test, a legitimate archaeological evaluation back in 2021. You can find on the internet there, and they go over, it's like 56 pages about what they found and the different sediments and how, that they only go to the 10-foot dig level, first of all. They don't go any deeper than that. And they say that archaeology will be an epicenter in Tula Hidalgo. That's their exact statement. They said that 75% of Tula is still buried in the ground. And so this would definitely lead to that as being true. These pieces here, you know, this is definitely a UFO-looking thing. We find quite a bit of that, different types of, you know, almost like rocket ships and sled-type beings, or sled-type vehicles rather, that have engines on the back or some sort of propulsion even on the back. This here, I mean, it's like a large, it almost looks like a portal, but it has a metal bracelet that sits in the portal. I showed this last night, but it's a really, really important piece, I feel, just because it's a functional sundial wristwatch. It has 12 points around the quartz crystal in the middle. It glows fully green. And the fact that the Anunnaki are actually the ones that split the day and the hours and the minutes, and they are the ones that decided on 24 hours and all of this. That's really interesting that they would have 12 hands on a watch at this time. And the Anunnaki reliefs in Sumeria, they're all depicted wearing these wristwatches. And so it's likely Fred Flintstone was more to the story and actually had a, you know, and this is just talking a little bit more about the division of the hour. So the Anunnaki did not directly divide the day and hours themselves. However, the concept of time and division was crucial to Mesopotamian culture, which was influenced by the religious administration practices and associated with the Anunnaki. So here's how time was divided in Mesopotamian society, reflecting their understanding of time, which was deeply intertwined with the mythology. A sexagesimal system, Mesopotamians used a sexagesimal-based 60 system for timekeeping, which is still evident today in our 60-minute hour and 60-second minute. This system is believed to have been influenced by the Anunnaki's divine order and was used to structure both daily and astronomical time. Day and night divisions, the day was divided into 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness, reflecting the natural cycle of the day and night. This division was important for religious rituals, agricultural practices, and social organization. The astronomical influences the Anunnaki were associated with the celestial bodies and astronomical events. Division of time was closely related to the movements of these celestial bodies in the solar system and the stars themselves, including the sun and the moon. And for instance, the lunar calendar was significant in Mesopotamian culture. And this lunar calendar is really critical because some of the symbols we're finding are representations of the zodiac in many cases. Virgo, Leo, a couple others as well. And you know, the Sumerian and Babylonian timekeeping cultures, they worshipped the Anunnaki and the timekeeping included the use of sundials, water clocks, and early time measuring devices. And so we find a lot of different sundials, whether they're on big, large bracelets, the watches, and even large, limestone, just ones that would sit on a table or something like that. These are a few pieces here, an example of probably the most defined. There's actually lines scoring between these symbols, which is something that we don't find on very many of these pieces. You can see some of the Egyptian type things, but this isn't Egyptian here at all. This isn't something that an Egyptian hieroglyphics expert could necessarily translate. They could say maybe this symbol means water, and this symbol, is the mouth, and so on and so forth. So there's meanings there, but those symbols are all relative to the Proto-Sinaitic language as well, and so they go back before, and there's no symbols that we find in the more modern hieroglyphics that we've translated. Over here is a little tablet about this big, and it's got symbols which it almost looks like it's doing math or some sort of explanation of science. I can't really decode it, but there's a lot more than just some scribbles going on there. And that's really fascinating to me, because in the Sumerian tablets that they found traces of trigonometry and advanced math and different calculations that we didn't believe that they were capable of at that time. And so it's fascinating. I hope to have that piece researched by someone with a high-end academics degree that could possibly give some insight on what that might mean. Here you see these two beings, the trunks, hoarded around the pyramid with the eye in it, and this is something that is very common. Same with the dung beetle, all relative to Egypt, but also very important in this culture as well. This tablet here obviously shows the Anunnaki beings, but also alien type beings coming out of a spacecraft. So it's definitely a new thing compared to what we're used to. Same with the little bearded guy here. This piece is really iconic because what it shows here specifically, these symbols we know of as mercury and sulfur. And that's a real interesting balance, because you have the eye here and on the right and the left. And I'm going to be using this reference quite a few times in the next couple minutes. So the right and the left hand of the Creator is something that we hear about in the Bible. Jesus is the right hand of God is what is known as. And so seeing Mercury here, which is also the symbol of Thoth, and some people like Billy Carson's thoughts that Thoth might have something to do with this same type of path as Jesus, and that some of these people have some crossover iterations. We see this symbol in alchemy, and it's called the caduceus, and the two serpents with the angel wings at the top. And I have this ring here. Make sure to look at this specifically, but you can see what almost looks like a DNA strand going up. It's got the snake at the top of it with the sun disc, kind of like Isis wears on her helmet in Egypt. And so these serpents going up this staff, I think, is really critical. And again, right, the all-seeing eye. Yeah, so that's where I'm going with this. I'm glad you recognize that.
About the arms.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they all have the same kind of arm, like there's some geometry there or something.
Yeah, I've noticed this, especially in some of the books. We found stone books that are 6 and 8 blocks, and they sit about this high, and there's detailed images, but there's beings doing different types of things with spheres and balls and different triangles floating in air around their hands. And so it almost seems like they might be depicting some sort of alchemy. It does show obelisks with energy coming off of them, as well as pyramids with beams going up in the air. And so some of the theories about the Giza industrial complex being used as some sort of energy production, this leads into that possibility to me. This piece here is really, really important, because you can see here it's almost like the caduceus. It's got the two serpents and the angel wings around this hole with the eye here. Again, very similar to that other piece too. If I go back, this is from Awelos, the other's from Tula, but this layout of the right and the left and the brimstone or the sulfur and the mercury. So we come here now, and you can see we've got Seth and Horus. And what's interesting is this is on the one side with this eye here, and then you can look through this. This is a piece of amethyst. And you flip it around, and then we have this. This here means water, and this is a loaf of bread in Egypt. Over here we see this circle within a circle. Now the circle within a circle is found a lot, and there's actually a deity that is depicted on some of these pieces with this as its head. And in some of them it's detailed out, and it's actually the all-seeing eye. So it's like an all-seeing eye deity. And so, we have the right and the right if you're standing this way, and then the left. Right here over was Horus, and so this could be, Horus, Enki, the water god. There could be some connection in this order. I'm not saying they're the same people, for instance, but in the Bible, there's the two sons of God, or it says the sons of God in plural. It doesn't say two, but in Genesis chapter 6, it talks about the sons of God in plural. So that's interesting to me because they're the ones who came and had their way with the woman of man in Genesis. And Genesis means the generations of Isis. So these generations of Isis are depicted on our pieces here from Mexico as DNA manipulation and some sort of creation or evolution of species. And so on this side of the eye or the portal, it's these two serpents. And I believe, in the Anunnaki beliefs, I should say, they believe that this primordial creator is this dragon, or the primordial dragon was their creator. And if you look in the Hebrew have a thing called the Adam Kadmon, which is the primordial man. And that's what Jesus technically became when he resurrected, because he took himself as a higher being and embedded his soul into a man, right? And then he died and resurrected. So he took what he was as a man as well as what he was as a primordial and became the primordial man, or the Adam Kadmon. That's really interesting because if these beings, these two serpents, were these primordial beings, they weren't flesh. And if they weren't flesh and they needed to create a flesh being, then they would impose their souls into the flesh. And that could be, Michael and Satan. And I'm going to go back because we have Mercury and sulfur. And sulfur, Satan on the left, Michael, Jesus, Thoth on the right hand of God. That could be a reference to the Caduceus and all of this in terms. And what's really interesting about this is if you look up the demiurge, which is a term that's used, this is creating something from nothing. And this was at the beginning of the universe. The demiurge power created this universe, is what I believe in the Hebrew text it states. And so that's really interesting because these two serpents could have been fighting with each other. And if you look at what the Large Hadron Collider is, if these are primordial beings of light, okay, the Large Hadron Collider is trying to simulate the beginning of the universe, the conditions, I should say, at the beginning of the universe. They're colliding photons at light speed almost and recording what happens. And so how did they know that these things were colliding at the beginning of the universe? It's quite a complex thing. But they're trying to simulate possibly recreating the demiurge power, or creating something from nothing, which would be the philosopher's stone in alchemy, right? Making gold from lead. And so that could be why this symbol is related to alchemy and pharmacy, and also why it has the two serpents, or possibly the two sons of God, being depicted. And this staff, arguing over the staff, if you go into the Bible and you look at the story of Moses, he has the serpent staff and they fight over him. And so it's an interesting connection. I can't say too much more about that because I don't know, and I'm not a Bible expert, but at the same point I can definitely see that there is a relation to this story. And when you look at what Set did to Osiris here, and you go back to the Dogon story, it's really an interesting thing to see that combination. And so I'm going to show a couple of these pieces here. if you guys can see here, there's a depiction of Saturn on the top of this. And there's also,
Come out into the light.
yeah, that's a great idea.
But not in front of the screen, though.
Yeah.
You could be on that side.
I'll go over here. So, this is a whistle out of stone.
And how did you discover that was a whistle?
Oh yeah, I'm a musician, so I
okay.
saw
You saw
this
the
part. Yeah.
functionality.
Yeah, actually the guy down there that found it,
And they sell them at the roadside down there, too. They're all over. Bird whistles.
oh yeah, the Mayan perfected a lot of different sounds. They had these large stone whistles where you could put water in them and tip them back and forth, and it would create a multitude of different sounds, and they would call animals and stuff. And as you can hear, it's very tuned to where it sounds, and that's the thing. We found about 15 whistles, and they're all very unique in terms of how they sound. Some of them will pierce your ears. Others sound very melodic, and there's one of them that's a skull that weighs about 25 pounds, all hollowed out, and I mean, it produces a very baritone, deep, really harmonic sound. Something that's found on a lot of these things. This is a seashell, and we find a lot of conch seashells. Some of them are really large, the size of shoulder to arm. I brought this one because it's a little smaller. But you can see the amount of work that's on these. Every there we go. This is probably better.
How do they light that up? I mean, the fire won't do it.
That's a great question. So I have no idea personally. I mean, it seemed ridiculous to me of how the heck they would know that these things glowed. If you hold them out in the sun, as you can see, the half-life discharged very quickly. I mean, it's not glowing anymore, right? So that half-life is something like if you go buy glow-in-the-dark powder at the grocery store or at the art and craft store, you're not going to get that type of half-life. It lasts a long time. It'll stay glowing for a while. And so the half-lives on these things, some of them are longer than others, but they're all uniquely different. They're not a consistent half-life. And so how they saw them? Well, they have wings and they look kind of like angels in a lot of cases. And what did angels have and what did the Anunnaki have? They had halos or splendor. Yeah.
Get close to the camera.
Yeah. But they would light up. And even Methuselah in the Bible, who lived to be quite old, she also lit up a room, it states in the Bible, when she was present. And so,
These things could just be worn out. I mean, they could have lasted for hours back then.
well, I don't know if the half-life of the luminescence would change. It's more based on the mineral composition that's in there and the purity of the minerals. So they were taking this, and it's not refined like the modern stuff is. They refine it now, I think, to get the most out of it, whereas this is more of a raw, unrefined method of doing so, is my theory at least. So, if these beings did light up a room and they did have a halo about them, which is shown on a lot of stained glass and talked about in a lot of different stories, they may have had UV light in that, and that may have made these things glow. And if they were creating these to worship their creators, like it said in the Dogon there with the Nomo, then you absolutely may see that. I mean, I can't understand any other reason why these things would do that unless they were trying to really impress somebody. And so if these beings came into town, or their creations, if they were embedding their souls into physical manifestations, maybe that's why we have all these different gods of the Zepteki era, because these beings were able to infuse their souls into physical manifestations. If you read a book called the Pistis Sophia, it's really, it was found, I believe, in the 2nd century AD in Egypt, or it was written in the 2nd century AD in Egypt. It was found in the 1800s, translated in the late 1800s to Latin, and then J.J. Hertok and his wife Desiree translated all 3 papyrus in the 1970s. And if you read through their version of this, you will see it talks about in chapter 21 how that Jesus, when he died, he came back and he took the fallen's power by 1/3, it says, so they could no longer succeed as they did in the beginning. So that's really interesting. 1/3. It said 33% in there, or 1/3, and that's just why that number. Well, if you look at a lot of these things, there's the biblical Trinity, right? And so in this story, I believe that the Holy Ghost or the Divine Mother, the Shekinah, was actually the Sophia or the Mary. And so when he exorcised the 7 demons from Mary, it could be because that was actually Isis embedding her soul into this flesh to become the Adam Kadmon with Jesus. And that's my theory, is that these two had this plan of action to put the fallen in their place and to do the transfiguration on the mount and to essentially have divine intervention. This is what the divine intervention was. They came in and genetically altered Adam, or the Adamu at the time, to create Adam. And that's why most people say that our age only goes back 8,000 years, but yet Göbekli Tepe's 13,000, and New Testament, Old Testament, the Old Testament goes back very far, because some of these beings were 1,300 years old. So there's obviously more history further back there in the Bible as well that doesn't go into great details. And so I think that, logically speaking, in the Pistis Sophia, he took their power by taking the Sophia to the 13th eon, is what it says. He took her and hid her away in the 13th eon. And so if she's gone, and she's the divine mother, if she was taken by Satan's tail when Satan was pushed by Michael, and that was the Big Bang explosion that we know of, and this is why we can see beyond the Big Bang now with James Webb Telescope, because there was something before in the heavens, but that was the beginning of our universe when he was pushed, and that could have been, why this universe that we're in has a lot of friction, I should say, in terms, this explosion and this creation of this universe, when Satan was pushed, it took the 200 fallen angels with him with his tail, right? And she was one of them, the Sophia. That's what it talks about in the Pistis Sophia. She wasn't necessarily bad, but because of the war and the fight that happened, she was taken with them into this universe. And that could be why maybe Michael chased after her to do this divine intervention, because she was being abused in this new universe. We have trillions of species in this universe, and all of a sudden now we don't see any new species? I mean, we've never documented. It doesn't mean it's not happening, but I've never seen a species or heard of a new species being born, especially something of our caliber as a human. And so that's a really interesting fact to know, that this isn't happening anymore. Maybe she was the creator, and that's why she was being abused. She created all these different species, and that's how they limited their power from them succeeding in the future, was by taking her out of the equation. These beings, once they were killed, they could no longer inseminate their souls into the flesh. And if that's the case, then that's why in the Bible it talks about slaying the last giant and going and eradicating these Nephilim and this pagan uprising, because they know once that's gone, they can no longer rise up and succeed as they did in the beginning. So,
That's the fall of man.
right, right. So, I mean, logically, that kind of makes sense to me. Again, I'm not a theology expert, so this is just purely my understanding based on studying these pieces, and I could be far off in left field, so I'm not 100% sure, but it does make sense, and that's gratifying, because when I was growing up, I saw all these different cultures all over the world with such unique diversity, yet, there's one thing in common: people believed in a God. There was gods in almost every culture, and so that's really, I think, an important thing to take note of, is that there is some sort of commonality between all of these religions. You take the 3 big ones, and there's some real commonalities in terms of the books that they use and so on and so forth. So I think there's more to that story as well. Yeah. Question?
What kind of ages or date ages are those, and what's the most recent find you have?
The most recent one I have here would be, well, this here came out of the 3rd cave. This is a pendant here that has the shamash on the back of it. Yeah, I mean, I get pieces. I haven't gotten any in the last couple of weeks because I was coming here, but I mean, they show me stuff almost every day. I mean, they're digging constantly, so it's.
In terms of new, like age.
Oh, as far as carbon dating goes, yeah.
So that's your newest discovery, I
Yep.
guess, and then what's the carbon dating that you have?
So C14 and Tula is very skim. We've got bones. We've tried to do analysis of the adhesives. Finding organic material has been really tough. We found some bone skulls, but getting the cartilage inside, or the getting active material ingredients to do the testing. We've done 3 tests with inconclusivity, so it's really, really tough. I've got a dagger with that. We've tried to get organic materials in the glue, but there is no organic material in the glue. So we've got some pottery that we're going to be testing thermoluminescently. And as far as Abuelos de Jalisco, the glue that they used has absolute some sort of organic material, whether it be copal resin, something of that nature. And it comes up 12 to 20,000, or excuse me, 17,800 years is the oldest one I've seen. And 12,000 is very common, 12 to 14,000. So I'm guessing that they're possibly in a similar range between Tula and Abuelos, but still something that we need to do. Unfortunately, getting testing done has been a root canal of a problem. I mean, for me as just an independent investigator, I could throw $100,000 on the table at a university. They're going to tell me to beat rocks because this is unethically extracted. I don't have the proper chain of command. This is not good. And I agree with them. And so that's why I'm here today. I'm trying to provide awareness of this so people with the proper academics can get down there and do the research. And that's really what I intend to do. My whole entire organization, aliencarvings.com, is just to document as much of this as possible, because if disclosure does occur, and disclosure has something to do with the war over our souls, and that's why we know that there's little other beings, we know there's spaceships, this is all scientifically pretty much proven, but yet we still don't have disclosure. And that might be wise because it's religious and it goes into the war over our souls. And again, with this book, The Pistis Sophia, I can't recommend it enough. It talks about certain things in there, and so this great mystery is repeated in there all the time. And what this great mystery is vague. But the great mystery could be disclosure. It might be what fuels us. It's what's fueling us to be here. It's what's fueling me to do my research. It makes me wonder, it makes me think, it makes me advantageous to go out there and try to figure it out. And so if I didn't have that, if we had disclosure today and we just knew, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go cruise? You know, like, I mean, it's an interesting concept, but that great mystery might be there for not evil purposes, but actually for good purposes. And so maybe the government knows that. Maybe they're working with high-end entities that has said, yeah, we got to keep this great mystery to keep people going. I'm sure there's a lot of, like I say, a war over our souls, because there's a lot of corruption, it seems like, as well. But there could be some light here at the end of the tunnel, is my theory. Question?
Could you light up the ones that light up?
Yeah, of course.
Have you had the chemical or whatever it is that makes the phosphorescent, and you tested that yet?
Yes. We have done preliminary testing on it. We found zinc and copper base. I think they're oxides that are found in there. So there's metal. It can be XRF scanned. As far as organic materials and doing any carbon dating, haven't done that on the green stuff yet, but it's something I would like to do. Again, if I could find a lab that said, Mr. Forrest, we will work with you, please get us what you need and we'll get it done, we would be all over it. So that's something that we're really trying to push for.
Has been any TV programs that?
Yep, Scott Wolter here, he did a show on his America Unearthed in 2019 where they carbon dated these. He's carbon dated pipes with resin at 12 and 14,000 years.
Is it glowing
Nope. He hasn't tested that either. This stuff from Tula is much newer. So the stuff from Abuelos has been out in their eyes. I mean, he's known about it for like 10 years. But as far as the stuff from Tula, it's in the last few years. And so testing is definitely more limited because it's just so hard to get the right labs. You know, I've got Ceram laboratories in France, and they're willing to work with private people, which is great, but it's $2,000 for a rock test and $1,000 or $1,200 for a carbon date, and that's just compared to $200 at a university. It's a real shot in the foot, you know, and then I have to send the piece to France or wait for them to come over here because they refuse to just take a scrape off of it and do it. They want the full piece so they can analyze it, and I want them to have the full piece because I want the test to be as strong and as credential as possible, or with as much credential as possible, rather. So,
Has any testing been done about energy signature?
yes.
Resonance that comes from?
Yes, big time. So electromagnetic frequencies with a tri-field meter, it goes all over the place. And that's kind of bizarre. We have also, you know, a lot of people when they hold them and stuff, they say they can feel an energy, and that happened before we got the EMF detector. But seeing that there's an EMF signature on there, as well as a radio frequency, you'll see spikes of radio frequency that comes off them. And I'm not an expert in that, so I can't say what the EMF is. I don't have a Faraday cage. So if I had a Faraday cage and could do a little bit more testing, but again, it's just trying to open up the can of worms and provide a basis, because as soon as disclosure does occur, if it does, then they're going to have to go back and relook at all of this. And if they do, then at least I've got 3 books that I wrote next door. You guys are more than welcome. They're on the table. Go flip through it. You can look through, help yourself. I highly encourage it. I've taken a lot of pictures. I'm a photographer, so I'm really all about trying to get that. I've 3D scanned with LiDAR a lot of these pieces as well, so we have that. I was inevitably trying to create a virtual museum so people could go on and see them and zoom them in, and we're hoping to get them into a physical location somewhere at some point. At this point, it's just a matter of where and when and how many cookies. So
This is amazing.
it truly is. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you used any different tuning forks around them to see if they resonate with any different frequencies?
I have a earth-tuned Solfeggio 532 fork. Actually, it's in my room. I brought it.
432, you mean?
Yeah, it's actually 532, I believe, which is in the Solfeggio scale, but it's at a higher. It's 530 or 532. So the Solfeggio is based off the 432 scale, but you can move up in like it's a 7-note octave, and so as you go up in notes, it's still within the scale, but it's at a different frequency, and so this is at a higher frequency Solfeggio than.
Solfeggios always add up to 3, 6, or 9. 532 doesn't add up.
No,
528.
528. That's the one. Yeah, you're 100% right. Yeah, and so we've tried that. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, absolutely. See, like,
Interesting, especially on that one piece where it's only on the pine cone, where it's only on the bottom.
yeah, in the symbols.
Deliberate.
And at nighttime, when you hit these with long exposure, like they kind of look, it's neat, but when you hit it with the long exposure, you saw some of my pictures are like this. It's just, you see the whole thing because it picks up the light for a couple seconds, and it's actually emitting more than what you see. So, yeah, time's up, guys. Really appreciate it. Yeah. And you're more than welcome to take the light too and